Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. It's currently Halloween and I finished my last book of the month, so I thought now would be a good time to go ahead and do my wrap up, but also I wanted to do it while I still had my nice Halloween shirt on. So we have The Music is Going All Music-y. I was very excited to wear this. This is the Hallowstream 2024 shirt from Oxboxtra, and I was very excited to wear this for Halloween. I saved it for this very special occasion. So yeah, should be pretty short and sweet just because I have talked about most of these books elsewhere, and I think we'll go through them in order of the videos that they were in. So the very first book I read this month is also the only one that I didn't read for a video. Let me just do a quick count. Yes, correct. It's the only one I didn't do for a video. This is Model Home by River Solomon, and I loved this book. I think I gave it 5 stars, 4.5 or 5, I can't quite remember now. But this one is following a family where there's these 3 siblings who go home to their childhood home in Texas to check on their parents because no one's heard from the parents in a little while, and upon arrival they find that the parents have died and they are trying to grapple with their history with their parents and also their history with their childhood house, which they all believed was haunted by some sort of malevolent entity, and it's really them grappling with the past and figuring out how to move forward from here. And our main character, whose name is escaping me, let me check real quick. Our main character is Esri, and they're non-binary, and they have a daughter named, I think it's Elijah, and Elijah is going through this whole thing with them and with her aunts, and seeing the impact that the childhood has had on her parent and her aunts, and then also grappling with childhood and being put in vulnerable positions. And it's really dark. It is very difficult to read. It does cover some very dark topics, including abuse of a child and child sexual assault, so be aware of that going in. It is very difficult to read, but it is worth the effort. It is really a rich exploration of its topic, and I found the main character Esri to just be such an interesting character to be following. They're very complicated and messy, and I liked that they got to be a messy person and that didn't make them any less worthy of being loved by the people around them. And I really enjoyed following Esri on their journey, even though it was, again, very difficult, and they go to a lot of very dark places in this. I really liked the dynamic with the siblings because it was loving, but also they had their own kind of complications, and it was an interesting exploration of the way that family can help us heal and family can also be the ones that hurt us. I just felt like this was a really fantastic story, and it's also kind of grappling with racism in America. This case, it's suburban, predominantly white neighborhood, and this family is the only black family that lived there during their years growing up. And yeah, it's just a really deft exploration of all of its topics, and I found all of the characters to be really compelling, and I just really enjoyed following them, even though it was going to these dark places. I just think it's so beautifully crafted. This was an incredible reading experience, and I think I devoured it in a day or 2. So highly recommend. After that, I made a kind of follow-up to a video I did in February where I was reading horror manga and trying some new series. So I tried a few more this time around. I tried 4, although one of these is actually an omnibus and not actually the start of a series. But I ended up reading I'm the Grim Reaper by Grey Weaver. This was, I think, my least favorite of the 4 that I tried. I can't remember exactly what I rated it. I think it was a 3. It was perfectly fine, but it just felt a little bit disjointed and underdeveloped, and it felt like we were jumping back and forth between very dark topics and these really lighthearted, irreverent moments in a way that just did not work for me. So overall, it was kind of disappointing, but it was fine. It's kind of an urban fantasy story. I would call it more urban fantasy than horror, and I think it's an interesting idea. I just don't think it was executed very well. And then after that, I read PTSD Radio, this is the omnibus version, so this is volumes 1 and 2, but this is by Masaki Nakayama, and this one is a discontinued series. The author stopped writing it, supposedly because of creepy things happening in their life as a result of writing it. Kind of unclear whether that's true. The only source I could find on that looked pretty questionable, but this one is a kind of series of vignettes that tie together in interesting ways, following a series of characters who are all in some way tied back to an entity that is related to hair. And I don't know how to tell you more than that because the whole thing is actually quite confusing. It jumps around in time, and the vignettes in some instances start to come together, and you realize that it's the same characters at different points in time, and it's really kind of unclear what the overarching story is, but you know that all of the characters have been impacted by this entity in some way, have encountered it in some way, and the different effects that it has on different people, or the different way it's interacting with people, is quite different. There's a lot of differences in, how many times can I say different in like 2 sentences? There's a lot of differences in the way that people get interacted with by this thing, and I don't really entirely know what to make of the story. I did enjoy the reading experience. I think I gave this 3.5 stars, and I am planning to read at least one more volume because I'd like to get further in and see if things start to come together further in the later volumes. But yeah, overall it was a weird and interesting experience. I fully expected this one to cause me some pretty significant anxiety, but actually it didn't, and I think that was partially because it was so confusing, but it did intrigue me, and I kind of want to know more. The third book I read for that video was Corpse Party Blood Covered Volume 1. This turned out to also be a omnibus or a bind-up collection, so this is actually also volumes 1 and 2. This one is by Makoto Kedouin and Toshimi Shinomiya. Don't know why that was so hard to say. Anyway, I read this one, and I also gave this 3.5 stars. I think this is an interesting story because it's doing some interesting things with its horror. This is following a series of students who are kind of after school one day, and they're telling a ghost story. And one of the students is about to move away, and they decide to do this little ritual together as a kind of symbol of their friendship, but the idea being that they'll always find a way back to each other. Except that ritual somehow chucks them into an alternate dimension or something, and they end up at the school that was on the same grounds as the school that they currently attend many, many years ago and was like subsequently torn down, and it was the subject of the ghost story they were telling. So they're now trapped in this like creepy school, and they're meeting all of these different ghosts and other entities that are living in this school, and basically being told you're never escaping, nobody ever leaves here alive, and it's about them trying to find their way back to each other. And I thought this was doing interesting things with its horror, because it is kind of supernatural horror, but each of the instances of somebody either being harmed or dying in this, the horrors that they encounter are very grounded in reality. There's some discussion of like grief and depression. There's also a piece of this that's about like the ways that the academic system can fail students and leave them without the help that they desperately need. And so I felt that that was really interesting, that it's a supernatural horror, but it's very firmly grounded in real issues, and I'm curious to see where the series is going to go. I am planning to continue reading this one as well, and yeah, it was just an interesting experience. I didn't love everything about this, as probably could be guessed from my giving it 3.5 stars. I don't love the way some of these characters are drawn. You can kind of get the sense here that there is some sexualization of these teenagers. They're like junior year in high school, so they're probably like 16, 17, but there is some sexualization of them that's really quite uncomfortable to read, and I also really didn't like the way that the one queer character is portrayed. So again, there were some things I just didn't love here, but I am curious to see where the story is going to go. And then lastly for that video, I read Another by Yukito Ayatsuji and Hiro Kiyahara, and I think this was my favorite of that video. I think I gave it 4 stars. This is also about a group of students, but this one is following Koichi, who is moving to a new town to attend a new school, and he's supposed to be starting at the kind of beginning of their school year, or shortly thereafter, except that he suffers from a collapsed lung, so he ends up joining the class a little bit later. And when he arrives, his fellow students are acting very strangely, and there's another student that he seems to be the only person who can see her, and things kind of spiral from there, but people are behaving weirdly. They don't want to answer his questions. He doesn't quite understand what's going on, and people keep talking to him as if he should understand what's going on, and he's just trying to like unravel this mystery of like, why can't other people see the student, what actually happened. And we actually get this little prologue at the very start, like the first couple of pages, which tells us that there was a incident 20 years prior to the story in which a student died, and a series of students in their class decided to pretend that they were still there. It was like a very beloved student, and the class entirely just like pretended that that person was still there, and then at the end of the year they showed up in a photo. And so that story, it's like a kind of legend of this particular school, is the kickoff for the rest of the story. So we're following Koichi as he is put into this new environment, having to figure out what the hell is going on. And I really enjoyed the way this mystery unraveled. I think the first half is a little slow. This is an omnibus, so it is like the full collection, and it's the full story. but I think the beginning is a little slow. The first like couple hundred pages, this is like a 740 page manga. The first couple of hundred pages is just kind of the same thing happening over and over. Somebody acting weird or something weird happening. Koichi tries to ask somebody about it. They're weird and cagey about it and won't tell him anything. He goes looking for information. Then something else weird happens. He tries to ask people about it. They get weird and cagey. He goes looking for information elsewhere. It's just kind of that for a long time. When you get into the latter half of this, I think the latter half is much stronger. We start to get some more reveals. We find out more about what's actually going on, and Koichi gets to be a little bit more active in the story. There's kind of a more definite goal in the story. So I really liked the latter half, and I had a good time with it overall. And then after that, I decided to read some haunted house books, except then I only read one, which was We Used to Live Here by Marcus Klewer. I was planning to do a full weekend of it for Jan Agaton's like layer readathon for the month, which was haunted house themed. My weekend didn't go the way I anticipated it was going to, so I ended up just reading this one on like Sunday, kind of very quickly that day. And I also really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4.5 stars. This one is following this couple, Eve and Charlie, I think is their names. And Eve is home alone one day when a family shows up at the door of the home that she and Charlie have just bought and are in the process of flipping. This family shows up and the father claims, like, this was my childhood home. We used to live here. Can I come in and like give my family a tour? Things go horribly awry as soon as the family walks in the door. Things are sketchy and creepy, and Eve is having to like deal with that situation, and she and Charlie kind of don't know what they're getting themselves into with this family. And I don't want to say too much because this is a very twisty book. It is a very mind-bending book, and I feel like, especially in the latter half, I just had like my jaw on the floor the whole time. It's very exciting. There's lots of twists and turns. There's, I think, a pretty confusing plot. So it is like something you have to kind of pay attention to because there's a lot of pieces and a lot of things going on and trying to figure out what's like the through line or that thread pulling everything together. Figuring all of that out, it takes some effort. But I would say that this reminded me a lot of like, based on what I've heard, it reminds me a lot of House of Leaves, just on like what I know of that book by reputation. But if you took that and mixed it with the Magnus Archives, this was giving me big Magnus Archives vibes, where it has that feeling of like an episode of that show where you're following this weird, uncanny thing that happened to a person or to a group of people, and now it's like after the fact, and it's kind of looking back on like, where did things go wrong? What's actually happening here? Is this supernatural or is it not? And I just really enjoyed the whole vibe of this book. I thought it was really fun. I liked the writing. I really loved the characters. I thought that Eve was really interesting. She's very like anxiety ridden, and I think that adds to the horror quite a bit because she's constantly questioning whether something is actually sinister or whether it's completely normal. And I just thoroughly enjoyed this, and the ending is kind of brutal. If you don't like an ambiguous ending, this was maybe not for you, but I felt like it really worked here and it was set up really well. And then my final video of the month was my vampire vlog, my lukewarm vampire autumn vlog that I was very excited about. So I ended up reading these three. So we started off with Dracula, which was the one that I originally planned to read, and I just had a great time with this. I think I gave it 4.5 or 5 stars. I had such a fun time reading this. It's a very weird book, and it's not at all what I expected based on kind of pop culture representations of Dracula. There's a lot in this book that just has not carried over into pop culture, but there's a lot of really good pieces in here. I love the relationships between the characters. There's a lot of really great friendships and some sweet romances, and there's like these moments of really shocking horror that had me completely like startled and cringing away from my desk. I was listening to this one on audiobook, and I also highly recommend the audiobook. It was the Audible original one with Alan Cumming and Tim Curry, and it's fantastic. All of the voice actors in it are fantastic. It's just a really good experience. I'm glad that I read it that way, and I just had an overall a really fun time with this. It's a really weird and interesting book. So then I was kind of in the mood for something silly and whimsical still, so I went with Dreadful Company by Vivian Shaw, which is the second book in the Greta Helsing series. Greta is a doctor for monsters and the undead. This book follows her as she goes to Paris for a medical conference and has an unfortunate run-in with a coven of evil vampires that want to use her for some sort of revenge plot. And I don't want to say much more than that because it builds quite a bit from there, but I just love these. Greta has such a wonderful little found family that she's built in the first book and that continues to be built in this second book. And I love the way that all the characters are so competent. They all have strengths of their own, and they really rely on each other for those strengths, and they complement each other really well. I just really enjoy the dynamic between everybody. And there's also a lot of really relatable characters. There's a lot of characters in here who struggle with like anxiety and depression and a number of just daily stresses as well. Like, they're just very relatable characters. And we have some good vampires, we have some bad vampires, we have some morally gray vampires, and it's just a good time. It was just so much fun. I really enjoyed reading this, and I just love to see Greta get to be competent and awesome and badass. She's wonderful. And then finally, I decided to read A Dowry of Blood, which I just finished today, and this one, I had a great time with this one as well. I gave it 4 stars. I think that there were some weaknesses in the first half of the book where I felt like I was a little bit removed from Constanta, and I didn't know enough about her in the early sections for it to be as impactful as it could have been, but I really liked the latter sections of this when we get Magdalena and Alexei kind of thrown into the mix, and I liked the ways that the different personalities changed the dynamic of the cast, and it was just really interesting. It's a really interesting and I think well-crafted exploration of abuse, and given its dark topic, you'd think it'd be really unpleasant to read, but the writing is just so beautiful. Like, it's beautifully crafted, and I think it's a really pleasant reading experience, not in terms of content, but in terms of like the words on the page, and I think that made it really engaging, and I had a good time reading this despite grappling with some very difficult topics. I think kind of similarly to like Model Home, it's doing something very specific, and I think it's doing it really well. I just feel like the first half could have been a little bit more impactful if we had gotten to see more of Constanta early on. But that said, like, the ending is, I think, fantastic and really poignant and made me tear up a little bit, and just really pays off all of the setup throughout the book. So yeah, I thought this was really solid. So those are all the books I read in October. I would love to know in the comments below what you've been reading for October, whether you read any spooky books for Halloween season or if you were reading something else entirely. I'd love to know about that, so let me know down in the comments. And I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and hope to see you in the next video. Bye.